No Child Left Behind was a federal education policy advocated by then President George W. Bush. Many local leaders have come to criticize the legislation as a federal mandate. Do you support No Child Left Behind? And if so, does it need any revisions? If you don't support the law, what would be your proposal for federal education policy? Mr. Hudson.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear the critics of No Child Left Behind because No Child Left Behind is the worst education law we've ever had, except all the ones we had before that. No Child Left Behind had a goal of accountability, and I think what we've ended up with is teaching to the test. But I think the fundamental problem is I'm not sure where in the Constitution it says that the federal government ought to be making curriculum decisions, designing tests, and doing all these things in education. We spend a lot of money. There's a big building up there in Washington full of bureaucrats at the Department of Education, and I'm not sure what they do. And I can guarantee our founding fathers didn't have them in mind when they were drawing up the framework for our government. And so if there is any federal role at all, it should be to make sure there are standards that parents can use to evaluate the schools and the outcomes. But frankly, I think those decisions need to be made on a local level. The federal government ought to send the money to the states. And frankly, the states have too much to say as it is now. I think the local school systems ought to be have more control over these decisions. And frankly, I think every school in America ought to be a charter school. I think we need to take away these restrictions. I think we need to let these schools innovate. Let's teach the children in that school based on the needs of that school. And let's give the flexibility to the educators and the parents of that school to make those decisions. The top-down approach, the one-size-fits-all, the federal government needs to do this, is the wrong approach. I would take the exact opposite approach in education. My mother's a public school teacher. She's here tonight. Hey, Mom. Appreciate you being here. I've also got the support of my wife, Renee, here. Thank you for being here. And so I know a little bit about education by watching my mother and hearing her talk about the challenges. We have some really dedicated people in education who are having a very tough time dealing with the bureaucratic rules and regulations.
Thank you. Mr. Kay.
Well, the question is, do I support No Child Left Behind? And the answer is no, I do not. At some point in all these debates, I usually have to take my copy of the Constitution out of my pocket here and explain that there is no federal role in education. So just based on the law, we shouldn't have No Child Left Behind. We shouldn't have a Department of Education. Now, when Republicans say things like that, they get tarred and feathered and accused of not supporting education. I have two young daughters. One of them is in public schools. I have a mother who was in education for, I think, about 40 years as a teacher, and I have several relatives who are in education. I think education is important just like you do. And I want my daughter and your daughters and your sons to have a good education because it's important for the American economy, and we have to do something about that. But the best thing that we can do is to get the federal government out of it, since they don't know what they're doing and they have no right to do it anyway legally, and to introduce at the state and the local levels more competition. Okay, because when we have more competition, then we don't have the monopoly, we don't have the indoctrination, we don't have the federal government telling teachers how they have to work and how much they're going to get paid. We don't have the federal government telling somebody that they can't say the Pledge of Allegiance or they can't say the Lord's Prayer in school. They don't tell the students and the parents what they have to learn. And you wouldn't believe what they're trying to teach my 5-year-old already in kindergarten. I had to pull her out of school one day, and I can't even talk about it in this company right here. But it is just horrible to me to know that there is a great big what do you call it when there's just one or something?
Monopoly.
A monopoly. I had a Rick Perry moment. A big monopoly that's telling all these people that they've got to take their stuff and do it their way.
Thank you.
It's beyond horrible.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Robbins.
Well, I'm glad that all of my colleagues believe that the Constitution does not have a role for the federal government in the several states. I want Scott to check the Constitution again, because I think he'll find in it that the Congress has responsibility for the District of Columbia. And for that reason, I love charter schools. I wrote with Steve Wood, who was education chairman in '96, the original House version of the charter school bill that has flourished all over the state. It's been great. But I will not vote for any education appropriation outside of the District of Columbia for charter schools or anything else, because there is no constitutional authority to do so. I would like to point out, even though my colleagues have embraced this position, that it is easy to oppose the Democratic Senate version of No Child Left Behind, or what the President says about it. But I opposed it when George Bush proposed it. I said it was wrong in 2003 and 2004. And that's the difference between my colleagues and I. I'm willing to say no to a Republican president when he proposes an unconstitutional power grab of the federal government over 14,000 school districts. You can look it up. You can go back and see where Vernon Robinson was in 2003 and 2004, and was opposed to No Child Left Behind, even though some Republicans, ran off a cliff because the president proposed it. I believe that parents ought to be able to choose schools, and that is something for the state of North Carolina and the local school district to work out. The federal government needs to be out of the education business.
Thank you. Mr. Steen.
Yeah, when did we quit trusting our local, state, and school systems? I have a problem with No Child Left Behind. I always have, and I didn't like it when they passed it. And now we're hearing from our educators at the local level that they don't like No Child Left Behind either. And we hear a lot from our educators. We hear a lot from other legislators who are having the same problem in their district. We worked hard in the North Carolina House and Senate this year to raise the cap on charter schools. Inserting a little bit of competition out there doesn't hurt anybody. Charter schools do fill a void, and they do a good job of doing what they do in North Carolina. I think that the Board of Education at the local level is the best people suited for expending money to the school systems, and with oversight from our county commission, who can oversee some of those funds. I think that we totally missed the boat on No Child Left Behind. Washington should have no role in determining how our educators are going to educate our young people in the state of North Carolina. So I do oppose wholeheartedly No Child Left Behind.
Mr. Wood.
Vernon, if someone had asked me back in 2003, I would have told them I didn't agree with it either, so I stand in solidarity with you. The sentiment has already been debated here already quite a bit, that the federal government really does not have a role in educating your child. I wonder too what happened to the education system. I got a whole bunch of degrees. I went to school a long time, but I was a product of public school, just like most of you here. And back then, I got a good education. We were educated. We weren't taught for a particular test. We learned to read, write, and do arithmetic, and so many kids today can't. The federal government has absolutely no role whatsoever in educating your child. I think you as parents should have a greater role in how your child is educated at your local level, going and talking to your teacher, to your local school board. I would really like to see very minimal involvement even at the state level. Maybe to say, okay, here's a set core that has to be adhered to, and then let all the different local school systems experiment and come up with innovative ways to teach your children. I don't even understand why we have to have charter schools. If all schools are supposed to be good and equal, why do you have to select out certain students? There's a lot of problems here. You're going to have to get down to the local level. My parents used to come to the school, used to inquire, used to be very voicey about which teachers I had when I was a young kid, because they knew which were the better teachers. We can learn a lot from some of the educational models in Europe because they do it a different way. They have two programs. You're going to either go to college or you're going to go to some vocation. So Again, local control and no role for the federal government whatsoever.